Good evening, wherever you're listening from tonight, and welcome to the Sleepy History. I'm glad you're here. We tend to remember Rome as something enormous. Marble columns catching the last of the sun, emperors and armies, names carved into stone meant to outlast everyone who read them. But that is the Rome of monuments, the Rome that wanted to be remembered. Tonight, we are looking for a smaller Rome, the one that never expected anyone to write it down. If this quiet journey into ancient Rome helps you relax, consider subscribing, liking the video, and letting me know in the comments where in the world you are listening from tonight. So let the great forum fade behind us and turn instead down a narrow side street, the kind that curved between tall apartment blocks and low shop fronts, where the paving stones were worn smooth by years of ordinary feet. The light here is changing. That warm, slow gold of early evening is beginning to soften into shadow, and the heat of the day is finally loosening its hold on the stone. The street is quieting. A little while ago it would have been loud with the business of living. Now the sounds are thinning out one by one. Somewhere close a wooden shutter is drawn across a shop window and fastened for the night. A little further off, the last cart of the day rattles away over the cobbles, its wheels growing fainter until they disappear altogether. A vendor who has spent the day at his small stall is packing up without hurry. He folds a cloth, stacks a few unsold clay cups, tips a basket to check what remains. There is nothing dramatic in any of it, just the familiar, unremarkable work of ending a day, the same work that people have done in some form for as long as there have been streets to sell things on. Above him, in the upper floors, lamps are beginning to appear. You can see them behind the shutters and through the gaps, small points of flame in the gathering dark. Each little light is a household settling in. One oil lamp, carefully lit, casting its soft and slightly restless glow across a single room where a family is gathering for the evening. For most Romans, this was the shape of the day's end. Not a grand thing, a modest thing. The city outside might belong to senators and generals and the noise of history, but this street, this hour, belonged to ordinary people, to the woman carrying water in from the courtyard, to the child being called inside, to the tired man leaning in his doorway, watching the light go, in no particular hurry to move. And it is worth remembering gently that we cannot see all of this perfectly. Much of ordinary Roman life left few traces, and what survives comes to us in fragments. The lives of the poor, the enslaved, the uncounted, were rarely written down at all. So we reconstruct this evening softly, carefully, from what the walls and objects and small habits allow us to imagine. Down the street, one family has finished for the day. A last figure steps toward the doorway of their home, ready to go inside. And it is there, at that door, that we will pause. Because before a Roman crossed into their own house, there was a threshold to cross first, and thresholds, as it turned out, were never quite as simple as they looked. So here we are at the doorway, where our tired figure has paused before stepping inside. And what looks to us like nothing more than a line of stone at the base of a door was, to a Roman, something closer to a small boundary between two worlds. The street on one side, with all its noise and strangers and open air. The home on the other, with its shelter and its people and its quiet, guarded warmth. The threshold was where those two worlds met. You would not have thought about it if you had lived there. That is rather the point. The rules that governed a threshold were not written on any tablet or announced by any official. They were simply known, absorbed in childhood, followed without any need to explain them. The way we still touch certain objects for luck or avoid certain small gestures without ever quite deciding to. One of those quiet habits concerned how you crossed. In some households, and especially on important days, it mattered that a person step over the threshold rather than tread carelessly upon it, and that they lead with the right foot rather than the left. The right was the fortunate side, the side of good beginnings. The left carried a faint shadow of bad luck, a sense that things might start off wrong. From that old feeling, we still have the word sinister, which once meant simply left. We should be careful here. Evidence for these customs is uneven, drawn together from scattered mentions, and we cannot say every Roman household kept them, or kept them the same way. Beliefs varied by region, by class, by family, and by period. What one home treated as essential, another might have half forgotten. The picture we have is a gentle sketch, not a rulebook. But the threshold's importance shows in the objects around it. The doorframe itself was watched over. Doorways had their own guardian spirit, and the very act of opening and closing and of coming and going was felt to be worth protecting. A door was not only wood and iron, it was the place where the household drew its line against the world. And think of the small ordinary things gathered at that line. The heavy door on its pivot, the worn stone steps smoothed by countless feet. Somewhere nearby, an iron key kept close, because what could be shut could also be locked, and locking was its own quiet statement of safety. These were practical things. A door keeps out the weather and the thief. Yet they carried at the same time a second meaning, a sense of care and blessing laid over the plainest daily necessity. That is the gentle paradox of the threshold. On one level it was pure practicality, a step, a frame, a bolt. On another it was sacred ground, a place where luck and protection were quietly asked for every single day by people simply walking into their own homes. Our figure steps over now, right foot first perhaps, out of habit more than thought, and disappears into the soft lamplight within. And as we follow we find that the sense of protection did not stop at the door. Inside, the household believed it was not alone. Something else lived there too, waiting quietly in the walls. Inside, the room is small and warm, lit by that single restless flame, and somewhere along the wall, perhaps near the hearth, perhaps in a quiet corner, there is a little shrine. Nothing grand. A modest niche, sometimes painted, sometimes shaped like a tiny temple holding a few small figures. This was the lararium, the household's own sacred place, and it meant that the family living here never quite considered themselves the only ones at home. The Romans believed their houses were shared with gentle guardian spirits. There were the lares, protectors of the household and its place, and the penates, watchers over the store cupboard, the food, the deep supplies that kept a family alive through the year. To honour them was not a heavy duty so much as a daily courtesy, the way you might greet someone you live beside and trust. And so the offerings were small and constant. A little wine poured out, a few crumbs of bread set aside from the meal, sometimes a pinch of incense, its thin smoke rising and curling in the lamplight. On ordinary evenings this could be almost wordless, a gesture done while thinking of other things, the way a person tidies a shelf out of long habit. On special days it grew more careful, more deliberate, wrapped in a little more ceremony. The exact shape of these customs varied from home to home, from region to region, and across the long stretch of Roman history. Not every household kept a shrine in the same way, and the evidence we have leans toward those with a little wealth. Poorer families, and the enslaved people within many homes, left far fewer traces, and their practices are harder to see clearly. But the feeling behind it is not hard to understand at all. There is a difference between doing something because you're watched and told to, and doing something because it quietly comforts you. And the household gods seem to have belonged to that second, softer category. They were not distant powers to be feared from afar. They were near. They lived in the walls, in the corner, in the small painted figures a child might grow up seeing every single day. To feed them, to greet them, to keep their little shrine tended, was a way of saying that this place was cared for, that this family was not adrift in an uncertain world, but held gently by something watching over the ordinary rooms where they slept and ate and worked. In a life where so much lay beyond anyone's control, that was no small thing. The flame flickers, the offering is made. The house for tonight is settled and safe. And this quiet companionship, this sense of being watched over from the very walls, did not begin when a person built their home or married into it. For a Roman, it began at the very start of life, in the first fragile days after birth, when a newborn was welcomed into a household already full of unseen protectors, it is to those first days that we now gently turn. A Roman child was born into a house full of unseen protectors, and yet, for the first days of life, that child had no name at all. This may seem strange to us, who so often choose a name long before a baby arrives, but in Rome the name waited. There was a pause between being born and being formally welcomed, a quiet threshold of its own. In many Roman families, this naming and purification day came around the 8th day for girls and the 9th day for boys, though customs could vary by family and place and period. That day had a name of its own, the dies lustricus, the day of purification. On it, in some households, the family gathered, offerings were made, and the child was at last given the name it would carry through life. Only then, in a sense, did the small new person become a recognized member of the household, greeted not just as an infant but as one of their own. We should be gentle and careful about why this pause existed, because it touches something tender. The early days of life in the ancient world were fragile. Many infants did not survive their first weeks, and although Roman parents surely loved their children as deeply as anyone ever has, they lived closer to that fragility than most of us do now. The waiting period may have grown, in part, from this quiet reality, a soft space held open before a name was given and a life was fully claimed. But we should not imagine it as cold or as parents holding back their hearts. The evidence, incomplete as it is, suggests the opposite. These were customs wrapped in hope, not distance. The rituals of those first days were about welcome and protection, about drawing a small, vulnerable life safely into the circle of the family and the watchful care of the household gods. And there was one object especially that spoke of that care. Around the neck of a freeborn child was often placed a small charm called a bulla. It was a little rounded case, sometimes of gold in wealthier families, sometimes of humbler materials in poorer ones, and it was worn as a quiet shield. Inside it might hold something believed to keep harm away. Its purpose was to guard the child against the unseen dangers of the world, the vague and frightening things that no parent could fight directly. Picture that for a moment, softly, a tiny charm resting against a newborn's chest. Morning light coming in through a window, a parent's hand adjusting the little cord, making sure it sits right. It is such a small thing, and yet it carries the whole weight of a mother's or father's wish, spoken or unspoken, that this child be kept safe in a world they could not fully control. That is the quiet tenderness beneath so many Roman customs. Behind what can look, from far away, like odd rules and superstitions, there's very often just love, doing the only things it knew how to do. The child grew, and the bulla was worn through the years of childhood. But childhood itself was marked in other ways too, worn openly on the body, in the very cloth a Roman was permitted to wear. A Roman could often be read at a glance, not by their face, and not by anything they said, but by what they wore. Clothing in Rome was a quiet language, and nearly everyone knew how to read it. The cut of a garment, its colour, the border along its edge, all of these carried meaning that needed no explaining. To get dressed in the morning was, in a way, to put on a statement of who you were. For a freeborn child, that statement began early. Alongside the little bulla worn around the neck, a child of the right standing might wear a special toga edged with a band of deep reddish purple along its border. This bordered garment marked them plainly as a child, someone still under the protection of family, and it was felt of the gods as well. That purple edge was not decoration for its own sake. It was a soft signal to the world. Here is someone young. Here is someone to be looked after. And then, one day, that changed. When a boy came of age, in a ceremony that mattered greatly to the family, he set aside the bordered toga of childhood and put on a plain white one instead, the toga of an adult, unmarked by that protective border. It was a threshold as real as any doorway. On one side, a child. On the other, a man expected now to take his place among the grown, to carry adult duties, to be seen differently by everyone he passed. We should hold the details lightly, as ever. The precise customs varied by family, by region, by wealth, and across the long span of Roman history, and the fullest accounts we have describe the lives of those with means, the experiences of the poor, and of enslaved people who had little say over what they wore at all, are far harder to recover. What survives is only part of the picture, and we reconstruct the rest with care. But the principle ran through Roman life at every level. Clothing showed rank, it showed role. A plain rough tunic spoke of labour and modest means. Finer cloth, richer dye, a particular border, all of these placed a person somewhere in the vast, careful order of society. Certain colours and marks were reserved for certain offices and stations, so that a man of high position could be known on sight without a word simply by the cloth upon his shoulders. There is something worth pausing on in all of this. On the grand public level, dress was about display, about announcing status in a world that cared deeply about status. But strip that away, and underneath it was something far more ordinary and human. The simple, daily act of getting dressed. Reaching for folded wool in the early light, feeling the familiar weight and texture of the cloth, draping it, adjusting it, settling it into place before stepping out to meet the day. That quiet morning routine was the same in its bones for a senator and for a servant, even as the garments themselves said such different things. The public world read the cloth for rank and meaning. The private person simply got dressed, as people always have, half awake, hands moving from habit. And here the language of clothing begins to branch. For boys, the path led toward the plain toga and the public duties of men. But for girls, and for the women they would become, the coded garments pointed toward a different set of expectations altogether. Quieter, more bound to the home, and in some ways more complex. It is toward a Woman's Day that we now gently turn. A Woman's Day in Rome is one of the hardest things to see clearly, and one of the most worth trying to see. The reason is simple. Most of what was written down about Roman life was written by men, and by men of the wealthier sort, who rarely thought to record the ordinary hours of the women around them. So a woman's day must often be reconstructed carefully, gently, from scattered clues, from objects, from the shapes of the rooms she moved through. And it varied enormously. Everything depended on class, on wealth, on legal status, on the city, on the century. A woman in a comfortable household lived a very different day from a woman in a poor one, and both lived differently again from an enslaved woman, whose hours were rarely her own at all. There was never one Roman woman's day. There were countless, and we can only speak in soft generalities, holding the exceptions in mind. Still, for many women of the middling and comfortable sort, the day turned around the home. And the home, we should be clear, was not a small responsibility. To manage a household was real and demanding work. There were supplies to oversee, food to plan, the labour of others to direct, accounts of a kind to keep in mind. A capable woman held the daily running of the house together, and that steadiness was quietly essential. At the centre of it all, very often, was wool. The image of the Roman woman spinning and weaving was so strong that it became almost a symbol of the good and virtuous wife, praised on tombstones with simple telling phrases. She kept the house, she worked the wool. Whether every woman truly spent her hours at the loom, or whether this was partly an ideal that women were measured against, we cannot always say. Likely it was both, in different homes, in different lives. But picture the work itself, softly. The basket of unspun wool, the weight of the spindle turning, the upright loom against the wall, threads hanging in ordered rows, and hands moving across them, hour after quiet hour, in a rhythm as steady as breathing. Around it the sounds of the household. Water poured in the courtyard, a voice somewhere. The soft business of a day being kept in order. And here is the gentle truth that lies beneath the limitations. Yes, a woman's world was bounded in ways ours is not. The law and custom drew firm edges around what she could do, where she could go, what was expected of her. But within those edges there was real life, and often real influence. a woman who ran a household well-shaped the daily world of everyone in it. She held knowledge, made decisions, carried weight that no law ever wrote down but that everyone around her felt. That is the quiet balance of it. Limitation on one side and on the other, a modest, genuine agency, exercised in the ordinary tasks of keeping people fed and clothed and cared for. And so much of that care flowed from one particular place, the warm heart of the home where the fire was kept and the first food of the day was made ready. It is toward the hearth and the morning that we now turn. The morning began with fire, or rather with its careful return. Through the night the hearth had burned low, its flames sinking down into a soft bed of embers glowing quietly in the dark. And one of the first tasks of the day, in many homes, was to coax that warmth back to life, to kneel by the hearth, to feed it kindling, to breathe on the embers until they brightened and caught. A small act, repeated every single morning, and yet the whole household depended on it. The hearth was the heart of the home in more than name. It gave heat against the morning chill. It cooked the food, and in the older feeling of Roman life, it carried something sacred too, tied to the goddess of the hearth and to the sense that a home's fire was the home's living centre. To keep it was to keep the household itself, so the plainest of chores, tending a fire, held a quiet dignity beneath it, and once the fire was breathing again, there was the first meal. But we should set our expectations gently here, because it was a modest thing. The Roman breakfast, the antaculum, was usually simple and quick. For many it was little more than a piece of bread, perhaps with a little salt, or moistened with a splash of wine or water, sometimes a few olives, some cheese, whatever was easily at hand. Nothing was made of it. It was fuel for the early hours, taken and finished without ceremony. This is worth sitting with for a moment, because Rome is so often remembered for its feasts, the long banquets, the couches, the many courses, the excess that later writers love to describe and disapprove of. That world existed for those who could afford it. But it was the exception, not the rule, and even in wealthy homes it belonged to certain evenings, not to ordinary mornings. The daily truth was far humbler. A plain loaf torn by hand in the early light, a clay cup of watered wine, the warmth of the newly woken fire nearby. And this, we can say with some confidence, crossed the lines of class more than most things did. The rich ate finer bread and the poor ate coarser. The details differed, and the very poorest sometimes went without. But the shape of it, bread and a little something to go with it, taken quickly at the start of the day, was widely shared. There is comfort in that ordinariness. Strip away the empire, the marble, the grand names, and here is a person standing in the soft light of morning, eating a piece of bread, waking slowly into the day. It is such a familiar picture. It could be almost any of us, in almost any age. The fire is lit, the bread is eaten, the day is truly beginning now. But the small morning meal was only the quiet prelude. The meal that truly mattered, the one wrapped in custom and gathering and care, came at the day's other end. And that evening meal, as we will see, had rules all its own. When evening came and the main meal of the day was laid out, a Roman of comfortable means did something that would look, to us, rather odd. They did not sit down to eat. They lay down. The proper way to take a real meal, among those who could arrange it, was to recline, stretched out on a couch, propped on one elbow, eating slowly from low tables set within easy reach. The room built for this had a name that came straight from the furniture, the triclinium, meaning 3 couches, because that was the classic arrangement. 3 broad couches set around a small table in a shallow open square, each couch wide enough to hold several diners lying side by side. You leaned on your left arm and ate with your right hand, and the meal unfolded slowly, unhurried in the soft light of oil lamps. There is something quietly luxurious in the very posture. To recline is to be at ease, to have nowhere you must rush to give yourself over to the evening. It was a way of eating that said in its bones that this hour was not about mere fueling of the body. It was about time and company and the pleasure of being unhurried together. But beneath that ease lay a careful order, one everyone at the table understood. Where you reclined was not random. The couches and the places upon them carried rank. Some spots were more honoured than others, and the seat of highest honour was known and recognised. A gracious host placed an important guest in the right position, and everyone present read the arrangement without needing it explained. Where a person lay quietly announced how they stood in the eyes of the household and of one another. This kind of dining did not belong to everyone. Reclining to dine in a room built for it was a comfort of those with means. In poorer homes, and there were far more of these, people ate more simply, sitting, perhaps on stools or benches, in whatever space they had, with far less ceremony. The elaborate dining we picture from Roman writers describes the lives of a fortunate minority, and we should keep the rest of Rome in mind, eating plainly in small rooms, as most people always have. And yet, for those who did gather in the triclinium, something gentle was happening beneath the etiquette. Yes, the seating measured status, and status could be a cold thing, a reminder of who mattered more. But the meal itself pulled in the other direction toward warmth. To share food was to share trust. To be invited, to be given a place, was to be told that you belonged, that you were wanted in this circle in the lamplight. That is the quiet tension of the Roman table. On one hand, a careful map of rank drawn in the very placing of bodies on couches. On the other, the simple human comfort of eating together, of not being alone at the day's end, of faces around a shared table and the low murmur of talk while the lamps burned down. The company reclined. The dishes came and went. The evening softened into that easy, well-fed calm. But the meal was not made only of couches and courtesy. It was made of food, and Roman food had its own quiet rules, gathered around one small, precious thing that touched nearly every dish that reached the table. Of all the small things on a Roman table, none carried more quiet weight than salt. We reach for it now without a thought, a cheap thing in a little dish. But in Rome, salt was precious. It preserved food through the long months, kept meat and fish from spoiling, and made the plainest meal taste of something. It mattered so much that its very name wove itself into the language, and echoes of that importance still reach us, faintly, in words we use today. Because salt was valuable, it was also treated with a certain care that shaded gently into superstition. To spill salt was felt to be unlucky, a small waste of something that should not be wasted, and perhaps a little omen of misfortune besides. Whether every Roman truly felt this, or whether the habit varied from table to table, we cannot fully say. The line between belief and custom was always soft, but the unease around wasted salt belongs to a much older world of scarcity and care, and echoes of that feeling still feel familiar to us now. Salt was also bound up with hospitality and trust. To share salt with someone, to offer it at your table, carried a sense of bond and welcome. It was among the first things set out and among the most humble, and yet it stood for something larger, the offering of your home to another. And then there was the sauce. If one flavour defined Roman cooking, it was garum, a fermented fish sauce that Romans poured over an astonishing range of dishes. To us the idea can sound strange, a sauce made from fish left to cure and ferment, but it gave food a deep, savoury richness that Romans loved, and it appeared everywhere, from grand tables to modest ones, sold in jars and traded across the whole Roman world. A kitchen without it would have seemed, to many, oddly bare. Picture the small world of that kitchen, the salt kept in its little cellar, guarded and used with care, the amphoras standing in the corner, holding wine or oil or that beloved sauce, bundles of herbs, wooden spoons worn smooth with use, the warm layered smells of cooking rising through the room as the evening meal took shape. And moving through all of it, quietly, were the small food customs that no one quite thought to explain. A pinch of something offered to the household gods before the family ate, a care taken with certain foods on certain days, little habits of the hands passed from mother to daughter, from one generation of cooks to the next, followed not because anyone had reasoned them out, but simply because that was how it had always been done, This is the gentle truth beneath so much of it. Some of these habits were pure practicality. Salt saved because salt was dear, sauce loved because it made food taste good, and some were quiet superstition, half-believed, comforting to keep. Most, in truth, were a soft blend of both, so tangled together that no one could have separated the sensible from the sacred, and no one felt any need to try. The meal ends. The lamps burn low over the emptied table. But all of this, the fire and the bread, the couches and the salt, belonged to the sheltered world inside the home. Beyond the door lay the street and the wider city, where an entirely different set of rules waited to take over. Before we leave the household entirely, we should gently turn the day around once more, because the rules of Rome did not wait until evening. They began early in the first greetings, the first footsteps, and the first movements into the public world. Step back to the early morning now, before the day is fully underway, and you would find something happening in the grander houses of Rome that shaped the whole social world. In the entrance hall, that open high room near the front of the house, people were gathering. Not family, not servants, visitors. Men who had risen early, put on their best cloth, and come to pay their respects to the master of the house before the day began. This was the salutatio, the morning greeting, and it was one of the quiet engines of Roman society. The men who came were clients. The man they came to see was their patron, and the bond between them, this relationship of patron and client, ran through Roman life like a network of invisible threads, tying people together across the lines of wealth and rank. The idea beneath it was an exchange. A patron was a man of standing and means, and he offered his clients protection, help, support in the tangles of law and business, sometimes a gift or a meal. In return, the clients offered their loyalty, their presence, their public respect. They came in the morning to greet him, to be seen, to lend him the dignity of a full and busy household. Each side gave something, each side needed the other. We should picture the scene gently, without grandeur. The waiting figures in the hall standing on the stone floor as the early light came in. The togas carefully arranged because appearance mattered here. The murmur of quiet conversation among men waiting their turn. And then the moment of greeting itself, brief for most, a word exchanged, a respect paid, a presence noted. It could be seen, of course, as cold, a ritual of hierarchy, a daily reminder of who stood above and who below, where poorer men lined up to honour a richer one and hoped for something in return. And there is truth in that reading. The salutatio measured status plainly, and for some it may have felt like a small daily swallowing of pride. But it would be unfair to leave it only there, because beneath the hierarchy ran something more human, something closer to mutual care. In a world with little in the way of public support, no safety net as we would know it, these bonds were how people got by. A client in trouble had someone to turn to. A patron in need had people who would stand with him. The relationship at its best was not mere transaction but a genuine tie, sometimes lasting years, sometimes passed down through families carrying real loyalty and real affection. And the details, as always, varied. Not everyone had a patron, and not every patron kept a crowded hall. The custom shifted across time and place, and much of what we know describes the wealthier end of Roman society. The lives of the poorest and of the enslaved sat largely outside this particular dance. What survives is only part of the whole. Still, at its heart, the morning greeting was about belonging, about showing up, about the small daily act of being present for one another in a society held together less by law than by these countless personal ties. The greetings done, the visitors filed out, back through the doorway and into the open air. And there, beyond the sheltered hall, lay the street itself, with its own crowded, unwritten rules of how to move among so many others. Out in the street the city pressed close. Roman streets, especially in the crowded heart of a big city, were often narrow, hemmed in by tall buildings that rose several floors on either side and leaned toward one another overhead, so that even at midday the light came down in slivers, Into these narrow channels poured a great deal of humanity, and moving through them was a skill in itself, governed by rules both written and unwritten. Some of the rules were real law. In the busiest cities, wheeled carts were largely banned from the streets during the daylight hours. The reason was simple. The lanes were too narrow and the crowds too thick for carts to force their way through by day without chaos. So the heavy hauling was pushed into the night, which meant that after dark the same streets that had been full of people filled instead with the rumble of cartwheels and the calls of drivers, a nighttime noise that some Romans grumbled about robbing them of sleep. By day, then, the street belonged to those on foot, and here the practical genius of Roman city building showed itself in a small, humble form. Set into the roadway at intervals were raised stepping stones, blocks lifted above the level of the street, spaced so that a person could cross from one side to the other without stepping down into the roadway itself. For the roadway could be filthy, wet with runoff, fouled with the day's mess. The stepping stones let people pass over it with dry feet, while the gaps between them were spaced to let cartwheels roll through by night. A single clever detail serving the whole rhythm of the city. Moving along the street you passed a wall of life. Shop fronts opened directly onto the pavement, their fronts flung wide by day, awnings stretched out to shade the goods and the buyers beneath. Bread here, cloth there, a place selling hot food, a workshop with its craftsman bent over his task. The boundary between shop and street was soft, the two flowing into each other so that walking down a street was to move through a continuous, crowded display of the city's work. And in all that press of people there was etiquette, most of it unwritten. Who yielded to whom? How you gave way, or did not, when meeting someone in a tight space. A man of high rank might expect the crowd to part a little before him, and might have someone going ahead to clear the way. Ordinary people simply negotiated it moment by moment, stepping aside, pressing to a wall, letting a burdened porter pass, all the small courtesies and small frictions of many bodies sharing too little space. Here we meet a quiet truth about rules and real life. The law could ban the carts and the engineers could lay the stepping stones, but the actual moving through the street was a thing of endless daily improvisation. No law could govern every yielded step, every muttered apology, every choice of who went first in a doorway. The written rules set the frame. The lived experience filled it in, moment by moment, through the ordinary give and take of people simply trying to get where they were going. It was crowded, yes, and it could be tiring, but there was a certain wonder in how it worked at all, how so many people, with so little space and so few officials watching, managed most days to move past one another without disaster, held together by habit and courtesy and shared understanding. And this flow of feet past the shops and over the stepping stones carried the Roman toward the beating heart of the city's daily life. Toward the market, where all this movement gathered into one bustling place, and where trust and rules met over every single thing that was bought and sold. The market was where the city gathered. All those streets, all that movement, flowed toward the places where things were bought and sold, and there the day reached its fullest, liveliest pitch. Stalls stood in rows and clusters, some sheltered, some open to the sky, piled with the abundance the city drew in from near and far. Baskets of produce, fresh from the countryside, fish, bread, cloth in folded lengths, small wares of every kind laid out to catch the eye of the passing crowd. To walk through it was to move through a wall of sensation, the calls of sellers naming their goods and their prices, the smell of food and fish and warm bodies packed close, the clink of coins passing from hand to hand, the touch of fabric tested between finger and thumb, the weight of fruit lifted and considered. Scales stood ready to weigh out goods, and around them the endless small negotiations of buying and selling went quietly on. And here, in all this exchange, we meet another kind of rule, softer than law but just as real. Trade ran on trust. There were official measures, standard weights, rules about honest scales, and authorities who could step in when things went wrong. But officials could not stand at every stall. What truly governed the market day to day was something less visible, the web of reputation that bound the neighbourhood together. A seller who cheated, who shorted the weight, who sold spoiled goods or lied about their wares might gain a little that day, but the market had a long memory. Word travelled, buyers talked to one another. A merchant's good name was, in a real sense, his most valuable possession, more lasting than any single sale, and a name once soiled was hard to clean. So honesty was enforced less by the magistrate than by the simple fact that everyone would know and remember. There was, too, the art of the bargain. In many exchanges, prices were not fixed but found, felt out between buyer and seller through the back and forth of haggling. This was not hostility. It was a kind of shared dance, understood by both sides, a ritual of offer and counter that ended, most times, in a price both could live with and a transaction sealed with a nod. To bargain well was a small daily skill, and to be known as fair in it, on either side, was its own quiet form of good standing. The picture is incomplete, but still meaningful. The workings of Roman commerce reach us in fragments, and much of ordinary buying and selling left little trace. The very poorest scraped by at the edges of this world, and the enslaved often laboured within it without profit of their own. What we can see is partial, reconstructed from scattered evidence. But the shape of it, trade held together by trust and reputation as much as by rule, seems to have run true. And there is something reassuring in that. Behind the grandeur of Roman trade, the ships and the vast networks that fed a great city, the daily reality came down to something small and human, to a seller and a buyer face to face, and the quiet understanding that a good name honestly kept was worth more than any single coin. The coins changed hands, the baskets emptied and were filled again. But all of this buying and selling, all this bustle of the day, moved within something larger and less visible still. For the Romans measured their days not only in goods and prices, but in luck and time itself, and it is to their sense of time that we now gently turn. The Roman calendar was not only a way of counting days, it was a way of judging them. For to a Roman, not every day was the same, not merely in the ordinary sense that some days are busy and others quiet, but in a deeper sense. Some days were felt to be right for certain things, and others were not. Some carried good fortune, and some were best left alone for anything that mattered. The calendar itself made this visible, in carved and painted forms, sometimes set up in public where people could see them. The days of the year were marked with letters and signs indicating their character. Certain days were fitting for public business, for the courts, for the ordinary machinery of civic life. Others were set apart, marked as unsuitable for such things, days when the proper action was to hold back. A Roman planning something important would want to know which kind of day lay ahead. Beyond this, there were days simply thought unlucky, days shadowed by old associations, on which one would not choose to begin something new, to marry, to set out on a journey, to launch any venture one hoped would prosper. To start a marriage on such a day, for instance, would have felt to many like beginning on the wrong foot, tempting misfortune before the thing had even begun. Far better to wait and to choose a day that carried a kinder feeling. We should be careful here, and gentle. How seriously each Roman took all this surely varied. Some may have followed it with real conviction, ordering their lives around the calendar's judgments. Others may have kept the customs more loosely, half out of habit of the way people do. The evidence we have leans toward the practices of those who wrote things down and set up the great calendars, and the private feelings of ordinary people are harder to recover. What survives gives us only part of the story, but the impulse beneath it is easy to understand and worth understanding kindly. Life in the ancient world was deeply uncertain. So much lay beyond anyone's control. Harvests and illness, journeys and storms, the countless ways a plan could fail through no fault of the one who made it. Against all that uncertainty, the calendar offered something precious, a sense of order, a feeling that the days themselves could be read, that there were better times and worse times, and that by choosing well a person might tilt the odds a little toward good fortune. Seen this way, following the calendar was not foolishness. It was a form of care, a way of moving through an unpredictable world thoughtfully rather than blindly. To choose a good day for a marriage was to give the marriage the best beginning one could. To hold back on an ill-favoured day was a kind of prudence. It gave people the comforting feeling that they were not entirely at the mercy of chance, that some small wisdom could be brought to bear on when, and not only whether, to act. There is a quiet dignity in that, in the wish to begin things well, to honour the shape of time, to face an uncertain future by at least choosing one's moment with care. And if the days themselves could be read for their character, then so, the Romans believed, could the wider world. For beyond the calendar lay another way of sensing what was to come, in signs written not on stone but across the open sky. The Romans believed the world was always speaking if only one knew how to listen. Not in words but in signs. A world in which the gods or fate or the deep order of things left traces of what was coming, scattered through the ordinary sights of daily life for those with the eyes to read them. And among the clearest of these signs they felt was the flight of birds across the open sky. This was the practice of augury, an ancient and honoured art. Certain trained men, the augurs, held the task of reading the will of the gods in the natural world, and the birds were central to it. Which birds appeared, from which direction they came, how they flew, whether they crossed the sky to the left or the right, whether they called out or passed in silence. All of this could be gathered up and read as favourable or unfavourable, a sign to go forward or to hold back. And this was no small private superstition kept to the edges of life. It sat at the very centre of Roman affairs. Before great public actions, before important decisions of state, the signs might be consulted. The sky watched, the omens weighed. What looked like a matter for statesmen and generals was at heart the same impulse that touched the humblest household. The wish to know, before acting, whether the moment was right. Picture the scene of it, softly. A figure standing on high ground, perhaps at the edge of the city with a wide view of the sky. The air still. The eyes turned upward, patient, waiting. And then the birds, appearing from some quarter of the heavens, wheeling and crossing, watched with the closest attention, as if the whole shape of what was to come might be written in their passage. There is a strange beauty in it, this quiet reading of the living sky. This too is best approached gently. The practices were complex. They changed over the long centuries of Roman history, and the fullest accounts we have come from a particular world, that of public life and its records. How the ordinary Roman felt about omens, how deeply they believed, how often they looked to the sky before their own smaller decisions, is harder to know. The evidence, as ever, is incomplete, and we reconstruct with care. But we should be slow to dismiss it as mere oddity. Beneath the birds and the signs lay something profoundly human. The future is dark to all of us. It always has been. And the Roman practice of reading omens was at its heart a way of facing that darkness, of feeling for the shape of what could not yet be seen. It gave people a way to pause before acting, to seek reassurance, to feel that the vast and unknowable was not entirely closed to them. There is real tenderness in that. The great affairs of state and the small worries of a single life both come down, in the end, to the same quiet wish. To feel a little less alone before the unknown, to gather some sign, some sense, some small comfort before stepping forward into a future no one can be sure of. And these signs, read in the sky, pointed always toward the same great source of order and meaning in Roman life, toward the gods themselves and the temples where the Romans came to honour them, with a care and exactness all their own. At the temple everything had its proper form. Roman worship was above all a matter of doing things correctly, not simply of feeling the right feelings, but of performing the right actions in the right order, with the right words exactly as custom required. To honour the gods was to follow the ritual precisely, and precision here was not coldness, it was the very heart of the devotion. This mattered so much that a ritual performed wrongly might have to be performed again, wholly, from the beginning. If a word was stumbled over, if a gesture went astray, if some part of the sacred sequence was disturbed, the whole thing could be judged flawed and begun anew, so that it might be done properly this time. The care was extraordinary. Every step, every phrase weighed and watched, because the gods, it was felt, deserved nothing less than exactness. Beneath this lay a particular understanding of what worship was. The Roman relationship with the gods was often felt as a kind of respectful bargain, an exchange of care. The worshipper offered honour, offerings, correct and faithful ritual. In return they hoped for the goodwill of the gods, their protection, their favour in the uncertain business of living. To keep the ritual exactly was to keep faith with one side of that bargain, to be in the truest sense reliable before the divine. Picture the setting gently, the steps of the temple rising toward its columns. The altar before it, out in the open air, for so much Roman worship happened outside, at the altar, rather than within. The thin smoke of incense drifting upward, offerings laid with care, and over it all in the late light the great columns standing calm and unmoving, as they had for generations. The record here is clearest in public and official worship. Roman religion was vast and varied, changing across the long centuries and differing from place to place, and the fullest records describe public and official worship more than the quiet private faith of ordinary people. Much of what individuals truly felt has not come down to us. The picture is partial, as it always is. But there is something worth honouring in that careful exactness, something we might too quickly mistake for empty ritual. To perform each sacred act faithfully, precisely, with real attention, was a way of taking the gods seriously, and of taking one's own duties seriously too. There is a quiet dignity in doing a thing properly, in giving it your full care, in refusing to be careless with what you hold sacred. And beneath the public grandeur, the same tension we have met before was surely there, the pressure of getting it right, of being seen to do one's duty sat alongside something more inward, a genuine reaching toward the divine, a real wish to be in good standing with the powers that shaped her life. Public duty and private faith, woven together at the altar. The incense fades, the ritual is complete, and from the temple's height, from the world of the gods and the grand order of things, we now come gently back down, to the body, and to one of the most soothing of all the daily rituals the Romans kept, the baths. Of all the daily rituals a Roman kept, few were as beloved or as soothing as the baths. For many, the visit to the bathhouse was one of the gentlest pleasures of the day, a warm and unhurried hour set aside for the care of the body and the ease of the mind. It was so woven into ordinary life that towns of any size had their bathhouses, some grand and some modest, and a Roman moved through them along a path so familiar it needed no thought at all. For the bath was not a single act but a sequence, an order of rooms passed through in turn. One did not simply wash and leave, one journeyed slowly, through warmth and heat and cool, letting the body be eased at each stage. There was a warm room to begin, gentle on the skin, a place to settle and let the tension of the day start to loosen. Then a hotter room, thick with steam, where the heat sank deep and the body softened and sweated and let go. And after the heat, the cool, a plunge or a splash of cold water to close the pores and refresh, to bring the body back to itself, tingling and awake and clean. This sequence was known to everyone. No one needed to be told the way. You moved from warm to hot to cool as naturally as you might move through the rooms of your own home, and the whole ritual carried you along its familiar path, asking nothing but that you give yourself to it. And there was oil. The Romans did not usually cleanse themselves with soap in the modern way. In the bathhouse, oil was often worked into the skin and then scraped away with a curved tool, carrying dirt and sweat with it. It was a slow and tactile thing, this oiling and scraping, part cleansing and part care, and often done for one another or by attendants, hands working over tired shoulders in the warm and steamy air. Let the senses of the place gather around you now. The steam rising and curling, softening every edge and sound. The warmth of the water and the heated stone. The smooth, cool touch of marble underfoot and beneath the hand. The scent of oils and the voices, always the voices, echoing gently off the walls and vaults. For the baths were never silent. They murmured with talk and laughter, the low continuous sound of many people at their ease. 'Cause here is the truth at the heart of it. The baths were never only about getting clean, they were about gathering. People came to meet friends, to talk, to pass the time, to be among others in comfort. Business was discussed, news exchanged, gossip traded, all in the warm and welcoming air. The bathhouse was one of the great shared spaces of Roman life, a place where the whole community, in its way, came together. And yet, within all that sociability, there was also a deep and private ease. For all the voices, a person could sink into the warm water and feel, for a while, simply held. The day's cares loosening, the body relaxing by slow degrees, a quiet peace found within a public place, the comfort of being among others and at the same time wholly at rest within oneself. The bathhouse was not the same experience for everyone. Not everyone shared equally in this world. Access differed by wealth, by status, by town and by time, and the enslaved who tended the baths knew them as places of labour, not leisure. The picture we have is fuller for some lives than for others, but the pleasure itself, the warmth and water and ease, was widely known and widely loved, one of the true comforts of Roman days. Warmed, cleansed and eased, the Roman was not quite finished with the care of the body, for after the water came the smaller, quieter rituals of tending to oneself, the oiling and combing and gentle attention that readied a person to face the world. After the water came the mirror. The care of the body did not end when a Roman left the baths, but there were smaller rituals still, quieter and more private, carried out in the soft light of a room at home. The oiling of the skin, the combing and arranging of the hair, the small attentions that readied a person to be seen. Grooming in Rome had its own gentle rules, understood without being written, followed as matter of course. Oil was central to it, as it was to the baths. Worked into the skin, it kept the body supple, and among those who could afford them, oils were scented, carrying a pleasant fragrance that lingered. Hair was tended with care, combed and dressed, and among wealthier women especially, arranged into styles that could be quite elaborate, shaped and pinned with real skill. A bronze mirror, held or propped, gave back a dim and shadowed reflection, enough to guide a steady hand. Expectations around grooming differed widely by status, by gender, and across the changing fashions of the centuries. Elaborate grooming belonged mostly to those with the time and means for it. A labourer had neither the leisure nor the oils, and an enslaved person's appearance was rarely their own to shape. The fullest picture we have describes the comfortable, and the ordinary and the poor are harder to see. The record shows some lives more clearly than others. But the impulse beneath it reaches across all those differences and touches us still. On one side, grooming was public. How you appeared mattered, spoke of your standing, your care, your place. There was pressure in it, the sense of being watched and judged, of needing to meet what others expected. Appearance was, in part, a performance for the world. And yet, on the other side, there was something entirely private and quietly sweet. The small pleasure of tending to oneself. The soothing routine of it. The smooth glide of oil, the steady pull of the comb, the folded soft cloth, the little jars set out in their familiar order. A calm and simple moment carved out of the day, given over to nothing but the gentle care of one's own body. There is real tenderness in that, and it is deeply familiar. Most of us know it. The quiet hour of tending to ourselves, half for the world and half purely for the comfort of it. A Roman before a bronze mirror, arranging their hair by lamplight, was doing something we still do, and feeling, we may guess, something not so different. The mingling of duty and pleasure, of the face shown to others and the private ease of caring for oneself, The oil is worked in, the hair is set, the small jars are closed and put away, and with the body cared for and the self made ready, the day itself was drawing gently toward its end. Outside, the light was fading, and within the home, the quiet preparations for the coming night had begun. As the light failed, the household turned inward. Evening in Rome had its own quiet rules, gentler than those of the busy day, and they gathered around one small and necessary act, the lighting of the lamps. For when the sun went down, the world grew truly dark in a way we can scarcely picture now, and against that darkness the household set its small and faithful flames. The oil lamp was a humble thing, a little vessel of clay or bronze holding oil in a wick, giving a soft and modest light. One lamp lit a small circle, no more, its glow warm and flickering, throwing long shadows that shifted on the walls. To light the lamps was to draw the family in from the fading day, to gather them into that small bright space against the coming night, and the house was made ready for the dark. Doors were closed and barred, shutters drawn across the windows, the home sealed against the night and whatever moved in it. The street outside, so full and open by day, grew strange and dim after sunset, and a Roman was glad to be within, on the right side of a firm door. The securing of the house was practical, a guard against cold and thief and the unknown. But it was also something felt, a nightly gathering of the household into safety. We should keep our gentle caution. Homes differed enormously, and so did nights. A comfortable house with many lamps knew a very different evening from a single cramped room where oil was dear and darkness came early and stayed. For the poor, light itself was a small luxury, spent carefully. The picture we draw is soft and general, and the real nights of ordinary Romans varied more than any account can hold. But the feeling of it crosses those differences. There is the dark outside, wide and cold and full of the unknown, and there is the warmth within, small and enclosed and safe, held together by a few flames and a barred door. That contrast is old, older than Rome, and deeply human. The night presses in, and against it the household makes its little island of light and closes itself around the people it holds. Picture the last of it, the single lamp burning low on its stand, the shadows soft and still in the corners of the room, the door barred, the shutters closed, the sounds of the street thinned almost to nothing. The family gathered in the small warm glow, the day's work done, nothing left now but rest. There is a deep quiet in it, a settling, the whole world drawing down towards sleep. This was how a Roman day ended, not in grandeur, but in this, a lamp, a closed door, a hush, and the ordinary peace of being safe and home as the dark came on. And now, with the lamps lit and the house at rest, we might pause here, in the stillness, and ask what all of it has meant. All these quiet rules, from the threshold to the temple, from the salt to the sky. Why the Romans kept them, and what they truly gave to the ordinary people who lived by them, without ever thinking to ask why. So we come to the quiet question beneath the whole day. Why did the Romans follow all these rules, so many of them, without ever seeming to question why? The stepping over the threshold, the offering to the household gods, the lucky days and the watched skies, the exact words at the altar, the ordered rooms of the bath. Seen from far away, it can look like a life hemmed in by custom, bound at every turn by habits no one had chosen. But that, I think, is the wrong way to see it. Look closer, and something gentler comes into view. These were not chains, they were comforts, and once we understand that, the whole strange landscape of Roman rules softens into something deeply, movingly human. Consider how uncertain their world was. So much of life lay beyond anyone's power to command. Illness came without warning, harvests failed, children did not always live, journeys ended badly, the future was dark, and the forces that shaped a life were vast and unknowable. Against all of that, what could an ordinary person do? Not much, in truth. But they could keep the customs, they could do things properly, they could tend the small rituals that were within their reach. And that was no small thing. To follow the rules was to feel that one had done what could be done, that one had not been careless, and that one had honoured the gods and the household and the shape of time as well as a person could. It gave a feeling of order in a world that so often had none, a sense that life had a form, that there were right ways to do things, and that by doing them you brought a little steadiness to your days. There was belonging in it too. These customs were shared. To keep them was to be part of something larger than yourself, joined to your family, your neighbours, your ancestors who had done the very same things before you. When you stepped over the threshold as your parents had, when you made the small offering at the shrine, you were not alone. You were held within a long line of people who had lived this way, and that belonging was its own quiet comfort. We should keep our gentle caution to the last. People surely differed in how they felt all this. Some kept the customs with deep sincerity, others more lightly out of habit or the wish to fit in. The inner lives of ordinary Romans are largely lost to us, and we reconstruct their feelings softly from fragments. We cannot claim to know each heart, but the human need beneath it all is not hard to recognize because it is our own. The wish for order in the face of chaos, the wish to belong, the wish to feel safe in an unsafe world, to do right, to be held by something larger than ourselves. Strip away the strangeness of the particular customs, and what remains is simply people, reaching for comfort in the only ways they knew. The great empire, the marble and the legions, has crumbled into ruin and memory, but this quiet human thing, the seeking of order and belonging and safety, endures. It endured long after Rome, in fact. It endures gently in us, and that thread, running from their days to ours, is worth following just a little further before we let the ancient world go. The strangest thing about all these Roman customs is how little of it is truly strange. Look closely, and you begin to see the Romans in yourself. For across all the centuries between us, across the fall of the empire and the rise of everything that came after, some of these small habits still feel strangely familiar, even when the paths between their world and ours are tangled and hard to trace. Think of the salt. The Roman who felt a flicker of unease at spilled salt would recognize the same small pause in us. The little half-serious dismay when the cellar tips over, the old sense that it is somehow unlucky. Few of us could say why. We simply feel something similar, a small inherited unease around luck, waste, and the fragile hope that ordinary gestures might somehow matter. Or think of the word that shadows the left side, the faint sense that right is fortunate and left is not, which still lingers in our language and our habits. Think of the wish to begin important things at the right moment, to choose a good day for a wedding, to feel that timing matters. Think of the small tokens people still carry for luck, the charms and keepsakes meant to keep harm gently away, not so far, after all, from the little bulla around a Roman child's neck. We keep our own quiet rules too, though we rarely notice them. The small routines we follow for comfort, the gestures we make out of habit, half believing, that make the world feel a little safer. The private rituals of morning and evening, of coming home, of settling in against the dark. We do these things, most of us without ever asking why, exactly as the Romans did. And if someone asked us to explain them, we might find, as they might have, that we could not quite. We should hold this gently and not overstate it. The threads of custom are tangled, and not every echo runs in a clean line from Rome to us. Cultures borrow and change and reinvent, and much has shifted across the long centuries. The evidence for such continuities is uneven, and we trace them softly as suggestions rather than certainties. But the deeper likeness is real, whatever the particular paths, because the truth beneath it is not really about salt or luck or the left hand. It is about the human heart and how little it has changed. The Romans, so distant in time, so different in the shape of their days, wanted what we want: to feel safe, to feel that life had order, to belong to something larger than themselves, to face an uncertain world with a few small comforts to hold on to. And there is something deeply reassuring in that, something warm to rest in as the night settles. We are not so alone across the centuries as we might think. We belong to a long, unbroken thread of ordinary human lives, all of them seeking the same gentle things, all of them keeping their small rules against the dark. So let the ancient world soften around us now. Let it grow quiet and dim and close. For the Roman day we have walked through together is ending, as all days end, in the same place ours will, in rest and in the deep peace of the coming night. And so we return to where we began, to a house at dusk, on a narrow street, in a city long turned to dust. Only now the evening has deepened into night, and the household we have followed through its day is settling at last into rest. The lamp burns low. Its small flame has done its work, and soon it too will be let go, snuffed gently into the dark. The door is barred, the shutters are closed. The sounds of the city have thinned almost to silence, just the faint, far rumble of a night cart somewhere, and then not even that. The rooms are quiet. The day, with all its rules and rituals, all its small cares and comforts, is done. The family lies down to sleep, and there is nothing strange in them now, nothing distant, just tired people at the end of a long day, letting the darkness gather them in, letting their bodies grow heavy, letting go. The same simple surrender that waits for all of us every night at the end of every day that has ever been lived. Above the sleeping house, the sky is deep and dark and scattered with stars, the very same stars. They looked up at these when they looked up at all, and saw much what we see, that unbroken thread again, running quietly from their night to ours, binding us softly across all the centuries between. We can let them rest now. We've walked with them from the fading light of evening, over the threshold, past the little shrine, through the morning fire and the bread, out into the streets and the market, beneath the watched sky, into the warm water of the baths, and home again to the barred door and the lamp. It has been a full day, and a gentle one, and now it is over. There is nothing left to do, nothing left to think about. The rules have all been kept, the offerings made, the doors closed, the lamps lit and let go. Everything is in its place and everything is quiet. So let it all soften now and fade. Let the street grow dim and the house grow still, and the ancient world settle into the deep and peaceful dark. Let the Romans sleep in their small warm rooms, safe behind their doors, held by their quiet customs and the long night's rest. And let yourself grow heavy too, and still and calm. There is nothing more to do tonight. The day is done for them and for you. Rest now, the lamp is out, the night is soft and safe, and the whole quiet world is drifting gently into sleep.